Imagine a man in uniform staring at a blank line that would erase his career. A fountain pen hovers, then commits. Ink crawls forward like a verdict. 20 years in the sky, gone with a signature. He isn't resigning because he's beaten. He's resigning because an institution can't stand the sound of someone saying, "You're wrong." That man is Claire Lee Chennault, Chief of Pursuit Training for the United States Army Air Corps, labeled stubborn, called a radical, and quietly pushed to the door. For one unforgivable offense, believing that fighters, used correctly, could break bomber formations. They said the bomber would always get through. He said, only if the defenders let it. If that title caught your eye, he was fired for obsolete tactics. Then he won the air war. Good. Keep it in mind while we go back to the moment a career ends and a revolution in air combat begins. And as we walk through it, tell me in the comments where you land. Team Invincible Bomber or Team Fighter? Tactics change everything? Chennault folds the papers. Outside Maxwell Field, Alabama, the air is warm, ordinary, undeserving of ceremony. He is 43, lungs scarred by years of open cockpit flying, hearing dulled by engines and wind. Those are the reasons on paper. The real reason sits in gray steel file cabinets down the hall. Memoranda, training reports, tactical manuals that reject Air Corps dogma, pages that say fighters can intercept, mass fire, and tear apart bombers if they're led, positioned, and trained for the job, pages that say the way you fight matters more than the airplane's brochure speed. To understand why that was heresy, we have to rewind to where the seeds were planted. Hawaii in the 1920s. At Ford Island, Chennault commands the 19th Pursuit Squadron. While the service obsesses over bombardment theory, he is in the air at dawn and dusk, stacking flights, drilling pairs, testing merges, documenting every turn and climb until the notebooks look like a cartographer's dream. He treats the sky like a laboratory. What if fighters don't duel like knights? What if they hunt like a pack? What if two aircraft, flown as one, can make 4 decisions faster than an enemy can make one? He tests, refines, repeats. Then come the proofs that bombers are untouchable. The Martin B-10 with modern speed for its day. The Boeing P-26 fighter is only marginally faster, and on paper that seems decisive. Maneuvers in Ohio are run under rules that handicap pursuit squadrons. Late warning, poor radio control, wrong altitudes, and surprise, surprise, fighters fail to intercept. A report lands on desks that reads like prophecy. Fighters can't reasonably catch bombers across limitless airspace. Investment should favor bombardment, and with that, doctrine hardens. The Air Corps Tactical School stops teaching fighter tactics altogether. The future, leaders say, belongs to the bomber stream. Chennault reads the same reports and circles everything that doesn't smell like reality. Speed on a specification sheet isn't the same as speed in an ambush. Limitless airspace is a romantic phrase, but wars are fought over specific bridges, depots, harbors, and cities, the very places defenders can concentrate around. Warning time changes everything. Altitude changes everything. Formation discipline changes everything. He can't accept staged exercises as science, so he runs his own. With the 19th Pursuit Squadron, he replicates the scenario, this time with proper early warning, disciplined formations, attacks planned from advantageous height, and radios used to vector fighters like a conductor guiding a symphony. The results flip. Bomber formations are intercepted when fighters strike as units, not solo duelists. Bombers come apart, especially when gunners are forced to split attention across coordinated slashing attacks. He writes it up, he teaches it. He is relentless. The pushback is relentless, too. At Langley Field, he graduates from the tactical school and is kept as an instructor, but he quickly learns the faculty room belongs to the bomber mafia. Precision, daylight. High-altitude bombardment will cripple industrial capacity. They argue, morale. Production will collapse. No defense can stop a determined formation. The logic is tidy, the diagram's persuasive, and the budgets flow toward big wings and big bombs. Chennault's lectures, altitude advantage, section tactics, mutual support, controlled dives, energy management, sound like a sermon from a different church. He puts his doctrine into a book, The Role of Defensive Pursuit. You'd think publishing a professional manual would be a career step upward. Instead, it paints a target on his back. He is promoted to major and then quietly boxed in. The message is clear: stop making waves. But he is not built for quiet. If you've ever run into a person who won't let sloppy reasoning pass without a challenge, you know the type. He isn't rude for sport. He just knows that in war, bad assumptions get people killed. In the spring of 1937, the paperwork solution finally arrives. Health issues become the public rationale. The signature becomes the exit. Colleagues exhale. The troublemaker is gone. The Air Corps can proceed with a single, elegant doctrine unbothered by dissent. Except the world refuses to cooperate with elegant doctrine. Across the Pacific, tensions flare into conflict. Chennault arrives in China on a short contract to survey the Chinese Air Force for Chiang Kai-shek and Sung Mei-ling, Madame Chiang, who understand that a modern air arm is the thin line between survival and catastrophe. The survey is bracing. Obsolete aircraft, pilots eager but undertrained. No. Integrated doctrine linking warning, control, and interception. And an opponent, Imperial Japan, fielding fast, nimble fighters and disciplined bomber units that raid with impunity. If you're Chennault, this is a grim ledger. And an opportunity. A laboratory no staff meeting can filibuster. Start with what exists: radios, ground observers, maps and clocks. Build an early warning net from villages and hilltops. Teach spotters what to listen for and what to say, and tie the whole thing back to a controller who can vector fighters like a quarterback reading the field. Train pilots not to duel, but to coordinate. Pairs, fours, and eights functioning as a single organism. Attack from height. Dive through. Don't linger where the enemy is strongest. Regain energy. Repeat. He reviews Japanese tactics and aircraft with the same forensic eye he once applied over Hawaii. The lesson is counterintuitive but clear. Do not try to match strengths. Refuse the turning fight that zero pilots want. Fight. A different fight. One decided before the first trigger squeeze by altitude, geometry, and teamwork. It's not glamorous. It works. Meanwhile, back in America, the gas pedal stays down on bombardment theory. Even as reports from Europe and Asia hint at a future where fighters decide whether bombers live or die, the orthodoxy holds. By more bombers, doctrine will carry the day. Chennault, a civilian now, can't order anyone to change, but he can build something new. He sketches a plan that's equal. Heart's audacity and diplomacy. China needs pilots, aircraft, and a doctrine that fits its reality. The United States wants to resist Japanese expansion without openly entering a war. The solution: recruit American military flyers willing to resign their commissions and sign one-year contracts as civilians. Purchase fighters through American manufacturers for transfer to China. Assemble the unit abroad. Train them hard. Apply the tactics. Change the story. Recruiting is a grind. Stable careers are hard to abandon. Combat on the other side of the world is a tough sell. So he tells the truth with no romance. What they'll fly, how they'll fight, and how they'll survive. The pay is competitive. The bonus for confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed is real. The pitch lands best with a certain kind of pilot. Skilled, aggressive, tired of peacetime routine, hungry to test himself for stakes that matter. Slowly, the roster fills. The aircraft question looks like a problem. On paper, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk is no ballerina. It won't outturn a zero. It won't outclimb one either. Procurement officers call it dated and look towards sleek new designs. But Chennault reads airframes the way a chess player reads the board. The P-40 is tough. It carries serious firepower. 6.50 caliber Brownies with ammunition to sustain a fight. It has armor and self-sealing tanks that keep pilots alive. And in a dive, it accelerates like gravity is doing favors. That last trait, diving speed, structural strength, fits his playbook perfectly. Attack fast from above, hit hard, get out clean, live to do it again. A tool for the tactic. Before that unit coalesces, China is bleeding. The early months of the war expose every weakness Chennault documented. Japanese raids town cities. Fighters carve up defenders who try to duel on the wrong terms. He takes the small wins. An intercept flown from the right altitude. A bomber that doesn't make it home. A young pilot who breaks the habit of turning with an opponent. And he reinforces them until they become culture. He turns ground observers with notebooks into an air defense network. that steals precious minutes from approaching formations. Primitive? Yes. Transformative? Also yes. Every night in the map room, the chalk tells the same story. If defenders launch late, they lose the altitude lottery and the fight that follows. If they launch early and wait in the right slice of sky, minutes become position. Position becomes surprise. Surprise becomes survival. If they attack together, gunners can't look everywhere at once. If they separate, they feed the enemy one target at a time. It's simple like bridge engineering is simple. Clear once built, unforgiving when ignored. And yet, this isn't the vindication promised by our title. Not yet. This is Prelude. The most controversial claims about obsolete fighters employed with modern method, about a fired major's doctrine humbling massed bomber formations, still sit in the future, waiting for the right aircraft, the right unit, the right day. Back in Washington, the plan becomes official. The civilian volunteer group is authorized. Contracts are signed. The first shipments of P-40s are earmarked for China. Pilots begin to trickle west in small groups under quiet cover, carrying new identities and a promise to meet in a place most of them can't find on a globe without tracing their finger across an ocean. They won't be called the name history gives them yet. Names come later. First come the long voyages, the heat, the rough huts, the mosquitoes, the crash programs and maintenance and gunnery. The endless briefings where one phrase is drilled so often it becomes muscle memory. Never fight the enemy's fight. Training is not glamorous. Repetition rarely is. Chennault breaks habits the way a blacksmith breaks scale, by hammering until the old thing flakes off. Two-ship discipline. Eyes outside. Don't fixate. Don't chase into a turn. If you don't have altitude, you don't have permission. If your wingman isn't with you, you don't have a shot. You have a trap. Pilots who arrive believing in lone wolf dogfights begin to hear the rhythm of something else. Geometry first, glory second. You win. The engagement before you enter it. If that sounds dull, wait until you see what it does to a bomber box that thought it was safe. Meanwhile, the enemy is not waiting. Raids continue, pressure mounts. And in the cities the unit will one day defend, the people are learning the sound of approaching bombers the way farmers learn the weather, by feel, by echo, by the way a conversation stops mid-sentence when engines sing at a certain frequency. These are the stakes written in ordinary lives. If you're still with me, ask yourself this in the comments. If you were designing a defense with limited pilots, limited fuel, and airplanes the experts say are second-rate, what would you build first? More speed or better timing? More bravado or tighter teamwork? Because the day is coming when the timing is perfect. The net built from radios and watchers will hum. The fighters will be at the right altitude, at the right point in space, at the right moment. The P-40s will tuck in, gather energy, and fall like hammers. And when they pull out the other side, something everyone knew about air power, that bombers can't be stopped, won't look so certain anymore. We're inching toward that day, but before we get there, understand. One more quiet truth about the man at the center of all this. Being right isn't enough. He had been right for years, and it got him fired. The difference now is that reality is about to supply a demonstration more persuasive than any classroom argument. It won't happen in theory. It won't happen on a chalkboard. It will happen in sunlight and engine roar, under wings painted with sharp mouths, over cities that have learned to look up and count, and the man who left Maxwell Field as a cautionary tale will reappear as something else entirely. A commander with results no memo can refute. If you're ready to see the first test, stay with me. The next chapter is where the obsolete fighter becomes a scalpel, and the fired major's tactics meet the hardest judge of all, combat. Dawn breaks over Kunming, and for once the city wakes to something other than dread. Far off, in the hills and limestone caves around the valley, a web of volunteers picks up a rhythm that isn't wind or traffic or prayer. It's engines, notes on clipboards, bearings shouted into handsets. A chain of voices moves across the map like falling dominoes until it reaches a single table where one man listens, plots, and decides. Vector headings leave his mouth like orders from a metronome. Altitude targets, timing gates. The P-40s are already climbing when the first bomber crews see the sun flash on metal below them. Wrong place for defenders. The Japanese think, because defenders belong down there, they don't know someone. Change the rules. Shark mouths tilt upward as the Warhawks reach their release point. The sky above the bombers is empty. Perfect. So the first attack comes in out of the blind spot every gunner dreads. Fast, steep, coordinated. 6 Brownings per wing spit a torrent so dense it looks solid. A key. 21 staggers, heals, burns. The formation tightens the way human beings do when they're hurt. It makes them easier to hit. The controllers are calm. Through and out. The pilots were told, and they do it. No victory roll, no second pass on the same axis, no chase into the escorts. They dive clear, extend, and climb back into the sun. By the time the Japanese fighters are positioned to pounce on where the P-40s were, the P-40s aren't there anymore. For bombers drop from the formation in flames. 3 more trails smoke and bad luck. The rest jettison their loads and run on the ground. People who have only ever watched bombs fall watch something else. Attackers falling. The sound is different. It is relief that doesn't know what to do with itself. Chennault meets his pilots without theatrics. Good, he says, and then the sentence that makes both friends and enemies roll their eyes when they tell the story years later. Next time, get them all. It isn't cruelty. It's the culture he's building. Precision, discipline, no indulgence that costs energy, altitude, or lives. Team Bomber always gets through. Remember them? They've just met their first exception. Japan responds the way great powers often do when surprised, by adding weight. 3 days later, the sky over Rangoon is inked with aircraft. Bombers in ranks. Escorts in numbers that look like a verdict. The defenders are a patchwork. P-40s of the American Volunteer Group and Royal Air Force Brewster Buffaloes. On paper, the odds are ugly. In doctrine, they're decisive. The AVG climbs ahead of the raid, fed by the same warning chain that worked at Kunming. Position buys choice. Choice buys initiative. When the call comes, the first squadron tips in from altitude and drives through the bomber boxes as if pulled by gravity alone. Concentrated fire chews into thin skins built for range, not armor. Engines cough smoke. Wings leak flame. The escorts, a swarm of agile Oscars, can't force a turning fight against enemies that refuse to turn. Meanwhile, over another slice of sky, the Buffaloes fight the old fight. They turn with opponents who live and breathe in the turn. The result is tragic, not because the British pilots lack courage, but because courage isn't a substitute for geometry. The contrast is brutal. One group slicing, climbing, re-attacking. Another pinned to a merry-go-round they didn't mean to board. When the raid breaks off, the tally isn't tidy. In real combat, it rarely is, but the gist is unmistakable. Bombers lost, escorts frustrated, defenders bloodied, yes, but still on the field. The lesson writes itself across smoke and sunlight. If you deny the enemy his preferred fight, you deny him his power. News finds its own altitude. Photographers arrive. Reporters ask questions. Someone coins a name that fits both the nose art and the results. The Flying Tigers. A logo follows, fierce and theatrical. The sort of image that makes sense to people even if they can't find Kunming on a map. The public, desperate for anything that isn't retreat and defeat, latches on, and somewhere in America, a file labeled with a fired Major's name becomes an embarrassment to anyone who signed it. Now that the world is looking, it sees the less cinematic parts too. Heat that wilts men and machines. Huts that aren't barracks so much as roofs. Food that might be fuel, might be punishment. Malaria, dysentery. Supply that arrives when mountains and weather say it will. Mechanics who keep tired engines flying by stealing hours from the night. Pilots who fly 2, 3, 4 sorties in a day because there isn't anyone else. Chennault's answer to all of that is the same as his answer to bomber doctrine. Discipline and design. He cuts waste with a knife. No unnecessary turns. No shots without a solution. No launches that don't begin with a plan to finish. Ammunition counts are treated like bank ledgers in a crisis. Every tracer you throw has to mean something. The early warning net gets tighter. Controllers get better at reading clutter and rumor and wind into a picture that makes sense. The average pilot, good, not gifted, becomes dangerous within the machine. The gifted pilot becomes terrifying. Aces emerge because any system that generates opportunities will generate outliers too. But the quiet miracle is how many pilots who would never have been aces under the old romance survive. improve, and start writing tallies on the sides of P-40s that, if you believe procurement memos, weren't supposed to be capable of this. Let's talk about that obsolete airframe for a moment, because the Warhawk is the third character in this story. Put it on a scale next to a Japanese fighter and you'll frown. Heavier, less nimble, climbs like it prefers steady over sudden. Then point it downhill and watch the needle leak. Ask it to soak up punishment and bring a pilot home, and it will. Bolt 6 heavy guns into its wings with the ammo to feed them, and you get a fact the enemy has to respect. The first burst that hits is often the last burst you need. Those traits aren't accidents in this script. They're the gear. Teeth that turn a doctrine into a machine. Altitude to begin, speed to enter, firepower to finish, toughness to lead. If you feel the simplicity, you're supposed to. Simple isn't easy. Simple is the result of doing the complicated work early. Battles roll forward. Kunming again. Convoys over river gorges, airfield raids that end with burning rows where rows of aircraft used to be. The AVG bleeds. Because no system erases friction, but it always seems to extract more than it pays. The legend thickens, not because the Tigers are perfect, but because they are predictable in the way good engineering is predictable. Give them time to climb, and they will ruin your day. This is the part of most war stories where we cut to laurels and parades. Not this one. There's a twist our title promises. The fired major isn't done proving that the assumptions he fought against can't survive contact with reality. The vindication won't end with a volunteer group. It will end with stars on his shoulders, and a command that tests whether his philosophy scales beyond a handful of squadrons. First, though, he has to convince a regular army that the path back and runs through results, not apologies. That case is being built every time a city doesn't burn, every time a formation breaks apart in panic and smoke, every time a newspaper runs a photo of a shark mouth, because editors know readers don't need the caption explained. Here's a question I want you to carry as we move forward. Drop your answer in the comments. Was it the airplanes, the pilots, or the system that won these early fights? If you had to give one of the three a medal, who would you pin it on? Hold that thought, because while the world learns a new name, Flying Tigers, the men in the huts are learning a new anxiety. Success attracts attention, and attention attracts pressure. Japan is adjusting. The raids are bigger. The escorts are savvier. The traps set for defenders are subtle and cruel. The AVG can't just repeat itself. It has to evolve fast enough to stay ahead of an enemy that learns. So the training gets sharper. The radios get cleaner. The discipline gets stricter. It's not popular because the human animal resists polishing when it's already shining. But remember that sentence back in Kunming. Next time, get them all. It isn't about greed. It's about leaving no loose thread the enemy can pull. In the nights between missions, when the generators cough and the mosquitoes hunt, Chennault and his small staff sketch what a permanent, scaled version of this success could be. Targets that matter, supply, lines you can actually feed, a balance between daring and husbanding that keeps a small force lethal for longer than experts think possible. It's not the dream of a maverick. It's the plan of a manager who thinks like an engineer. And then, almost as suddenly as he vanished from Maxwell Field, Claire Lee Chennault reappears on the official rolls of the United States Army Air Forces, not as the man they eased out, as the man whose phone calls get returned. Rank follows faster than anyone. Predicted, because sometimes institutions shift not from revelation, but from necessity. He is asked to take what he proved with volunteers and build with regulars. Before we scale up, there's one more lesson the AVG teaches that gets less ink than shark mouths, but matters just as much. Logistics is destiny. Fuel cans, spare parts, tires, ammo loads, motor oil, spark plugs, coolant, the quiet, boring nouns. Decide which mornings you can fight and which mornings you can only watch. Every mile over mountain steals a little from your next fight. Every truck ambushed on a jungle road is an airplane that won't climb tomorrow. The Tigers fight on margins so thin. You could cut your thumb on them, and they still produce results that make planners back home rework their math. That's the setup for Act 3. The fired major has proven that obsolete is a lazy word when doctrine is lazy. He has shown that training can turn average into deadly and gifted into decisive. He has built an early warning net out of radios and humans that lets a few become many. Now he's handed a harder problem. Run an air force in a theater where supply is a miracle, politics is a minefield, and victory depends on doing more with less for longer than most can stand. If you've been wondering when the second half of our title arrives, then he won the air war. The answer is, when he scales everything that worked, survives everything that didn't, and proves that what looked like a one-off was actually a blueprint. Take a breath. The next stretch moves from squadrons to groups, from tactics to operations, from survival to strategy, and it's where the last holdouts of the bomber myth run into math they can't lawyer away. Watch a map of China and Burma the way a sailor watches tide tables. Arrows mark rivers that become runways for supplies. Dotted lines crawl over mountains with a name that sounds like a warning. The hump. Every gallon that crosses those ridge lines arrives with a story and a cost. Every crate of 50 caliber belts is an IOU written in oxygen and nerve. This is where an air force is built not from plenty, but from scarcity made obedient. The volunteer group gives way to regular flags and regular paperwork, but not to regular thinking. A new banner appears, China Air Task Force, and under it the same logic Chennault drilled into exhausted men in grass huts becomes the operating system for a theater. Choose fights you can win. Strike what the enemy needs, not what looks impressive. Conserve energy, ammunition, and time. Waste none of the three. Build a picture of the sky before the enemy draws his own. If you could stand on a ridge and watch a week of missions time-lapsed, you'd notice a pattern. Recon first, always. Not because photographs are pretty, but because fuel is precious and mistakes are expensive. Then the ambushes, shipping on rivers, locomotives threading through cuts in the hills, depots that look like ant colonies until you realize those ants are fuel drums and shells. Fighters work as fighter bombers because the best airplane is the one that shows up with the right plan. Medium bombers with fighter cover pluck out. Airfields in the early morning when propellers are still cold and human reactions are slower than smoke. Every victory buys two things: confidence for the next mission and hatred from an enemy who doesn't like being out-engineered. The Japanese adapt. Escorts grow teeth. Raids split, faint, recombine. The AVG successors adapt faster. Controllers get bolder. Vectoring pairs into perfect pounces with economy of language that sounds almost bored on the radio. It isn't boredom, it's fluency. Promotion catches Chennault like a gust that he didn't ask for but knows how to ride. Colonel, Brigadier, then Major General. If you're counting, that's the arc from fired major to theater air commander in the time it takes to teach a new class of pilots what never turn with him really means. The decorations on his chest matter less than the numbers on his wall. Sorties flown, serviceable aircraft at dawn, tonnage of supplies over the hump, targets struck that actually bend the enemies. Campaign. Those numbers tell a story doctrine can't spin. The hump itself becomes a character, half ally, half enemy. Weather builds a fortress over the Himalayas every afternoon. C-47s claw at the sky until ice and turbulence play coin toss with their wings. Pilots memorize cloud shapes the way gamblers memorize tells. Not everyone comes back. Chennault budgets lost the way a commander must, coldly. But he never stops asking whether a gallon flown over mountains is worth a gallon burned on the wrong target. It sharpens his aim. It trims his wish list. It keeps the 14th Air Force, small by comparison with other theaters, punching like a heavyweight anyway. The targets that matter tell you who he is, ships that feed an army, bridges that tie fronts together, airfields whose fighters are better destroyed on the ground than contested in the air, trains, because steel kills distance. You could call it unromantic. You could also call it how wars are shortened. And yet, for all the results, there are arguments that don't end. Joseph Stilwell, a ground commander with his own impossible math, wants resources poured into building Chinese armies and reopening land routes. Chennault, who has watched airplanes do in hours what trucks struggle to do in weeks, argues for air first, air second, air always, so long as the calculus favors effect per gallon. The two men speak different dialects of necessity. Sparks fly. Washington hears about it. What saves Chennault is not charm, it's that his ledger keeps coming up with black ink where others see red. Meanwhile, far from the monsoon and the hump, another part of his thesis is being proven by men he doesn't command. Over Europe, tight formations of American bombers push toward factories and rail yards with faith that precision and courage are enough. German fighters don't debate doctrine. They simply appear. Loss rates climb into numbers that taste like metal. The rescue comes not from thicker skins or more guns on the bombers, but from long-range escort fighters whose job description could have been pulled from Chennault's notebook. Own the altitude, write the geometry, fight your fight, and the bombers will live. The Mustang joins the stream and distances shrink, not on the map, but in fear. The sentence, "the bomber will always get through," finally meets its accountant. Back in China, the 14th Air Force refines a rhythm. The day might begin with an early scramble, an intercept guided by a warning net that now includes radios, observers, and the intuition of controllers who have heard war long enough to guess its next note. Midday might see small packages leapfrog across friendly strips, striking depots that feed Japanese columns. By late afternoon, with the mountains brewing weather, fighter-bombers hunt trains at low level, cannon shells walking down rails into boilers that burst like thunder under a hand. At night, transport crews take the hump again because tomorrow's missions are built on tonight's. Courage. Losses come with the territory. You can feel the grit in every reunion photo taken years after the war. Men who outlived their own statistics. But watch the curves that matter. The enemy aircraft destroyed, ships sunk, vehicles wrecked, stockpiles erased. And you see why a small air force can change a large front. Air doesn't hold ground. It shapes what ground can hold. Chennault's doctrine also shapes culture. Wingmen who once saw themselves as shadows learn that survival and victory are mutual investments. Leaders who love the chase learn to love the extension more. Debriefs are not for celebrating. They're for turning a good idea into muscle memory. And memory, multiplied across squadrons and months, becomes tradition. Ask any pilot from the generations that follow about two-ship and four-ship tactics, about energy management, about refusing a bad merge. And you will hear Chennault speaking through a different voice in a different airplane. His critics don't disappear. Some will never forgive his habit of writing letters over heads when he thinks time is being wasted. Others believe his theater steals headlines because shark mouths photograph well. He ignores the noise and watches the numbers, the only critics a commander can't argue with. The war's end begins as a rumor and arrives as a quiet that feels unearned. The 14th Air Force has done the impossible so long that impossible changes definition when victory spreads across. Maps like a slowly lifting tide, Chennault steps away again, this time by choice, this time with the arc of his life bent into a different shape, fired for obsolete tactics, retired with stars earned in battles that wrote manuals in real time. But the story we promised doesn't end with medals or rank. It ends with consequences that outlive the men. Fighter doctrine changes permanently. Early warning evolves from telephones on stools to radars on towers to networks that carry the same information faster and farther. But the idea is unchanged. See first, decide first, arrive first with a plan the enemy can't execute against. Training schools remodel themselves around realism. Exercises simulate ambush and exhaustion because the first time you feel a thing shouldn't be the first time it can kill you. The words painted on hangar walls shift from courage to competence and discipline. Not because courage is obsolete, but because it is squandered without the others. Now, if you've stayed with me this far, you deserve the full turn of the title's screw. He was fired for obsolete tactics. Then he won the air war. Is not just about one man collecting vindication like a debt. It's about how a single tested idea can drag an institution toward the truth, and how reality, stubborn, empirical, often unsentimental, picks winners in the end. Before we close, I want your take. Drop a comment with one lesson from Chennault's fight you'd apply outside of war. Is it the discipline to refuse a bad fight? The humility to test doctrine against reality? The focus on effect per resource? Which one changes your day tomorrow? Hold that thought for the finale, because the final scene is the one even Chennault's admirers sometimes miss. The reckoning with the bomber myth, the roll call of cities that didn't burn because fighters did their job, and the bridge between a Maverick's lab notes and the playbook that every modern fighter pilot carries into the sky. And yes, the call to action you already know I'm going to make, because stories like this deserve a bigger audience, and because your click is how complex history beats the algorithm. Picture Europe's sky as a ledger written in contrails. Lines of bombers head east, geometry tight, doctrine tighter. They've been promised that precision and courage will carry them through. Then the margin notes arrive and fire. Interceptors. The math turns red. Crews vanish. The bomber will always get through starts to sound like whistling past a graveyard. The fix doesn't come from adding more guns to bombers or flying closer. It comes from an answer our story has been building towards since Hawaii. Fighters decide who lives. Long-range escorts, sleek, fast, disciplined, take the high ground and write the fight on their terms. Altitude first, energy banked, geometry chosen, not suffered. Suddenly the same routes that were meat grinders turn survivable. If you've been hearing Chennault in every one of those moves, good, because his argument just walked onto a continent and proved itself at scale. Back in China, the 14th Air Force fights a different war with the same grammar. Think of it as applied efficiency. Bridges are verbs, trains are arteries, depots are hearts. Hit the verbs and nothing moves. Nick the arteries and divisions starve. Stop the hearts and campaigns stall. You don't need giant fleets of heavy bombers to make that happen. You need the eyes to see the pattern and the nerve to strike it, again and again, with the means you actually have. Supply remains the invisible front. Every mission you watch is balanced on an equation that includes weather over the hump, the number of spark plugs in a canvas bag, and how many hours a crew chief can stay awake before good enough becomes someone doesn't come home. Chennault's gift is refusing to romanticize any of it. He treats luck like a thief and time like a paycheck that's always a little short. That's not cynicism. It's respect for reality. He also refuses the trap of hero worship. Yes, aces matter. Yes, a few pilots seem to bend chance, but the culture he hammers into place makes average pilots excellent and excellent pilots nearly unfair. 2-ship and 4-ship discipline. Communication like it costs money. A debrief culture that turns "we got away with it" into "we'll do it better." The result is less about streaks and more about a slope, an upward line of competence that keeps paying interest. Not everyone applauds. Stillwell and others argue loudly that air power is a supplement, not a strategy, that roads must reopen and armies must be built first. Chennault is stubborn in return, because stubbornness is just consistency under pressure. He doesn't claim airplanes can win wars alone. He claims they can change the terms so dramatically that the ground has a chance to matter. And in the one theater where every gallon is a vote, he keeps winning the only argument that counts. Outcomes per unit of pain. Meanwhile, the world catches up to the truth Chennault lived in. Fighters are not an accessory. They are the hinge, escort. Turns slaughter into strategy. Interception turns doctrine into debris. Early warning turns fear into planning. Training turns survival into habit. If you want a single sentence you can write on a sticky note and keep by your desk, try this. Refusing the wrong fight is how you win the right one later. So how does a man who was eased out for obsolete thinking end up with stars and an air force that punches above its weight? The same way the P-40, dismissed as yesterday's news, became a surgeon's tool, by pairing the machine you have with a method that fits its nature. That's the thought experiment I want you to weigh in on below. What in your world looks obsolete until someone uses it properly? We're almost there. The end game that ties the bomber myth's collapse to a maverick's vindication, and the bridge from jungle airstrips to the manuals that shaped generations. In the finale, the reckoning, the legacy that outlived the war, and the unexpected second act that carried Chennault's imprint into peacetime shadows. Stay with me. One last turn, and then I'll ask you for something simple that helps stories like this beat the algorithm and keep history loud. Here is the reckoning the title promised. The myth met the meter, and the meter didn't blink. Unescorted bombers bled over Europe until escorts rewrote the script. In China, a small air force carved time and space out of mountains and monsoon until the enemy's calendar fell behind. The sentence that ended a career, "Fighters can't stop bombers," dissolved in the glow of burning engine nacelles and the quieter arithmetic of convoys that never arrived. And the man who signed away his rank, he returned wearing new ones. First as a recalled officer, then as a general, then as a theater commander whose operational map looked like a systems diagram. Sensors feeding controllers, controllers feeding fighters, fighters striking targets that changed ground truth. The same idea scaled. See first, decide first, arrive with advantage. And with it, a theater that should have been a backwater became a proving ground for how air power multiplies the worth of every hard mile of supply. War's final chapter did not come as a triumphant drumroll. It came as fatigue, attrition, and, finally, quiet. The 14th Air Force had done more with less for so long that less learned to be afraid of them. When the guns cooled and the maps stiffened into borders, Chennault stepped out of uniform again, this time with a legacy that couldn't be filed away. Fired for obsolete tactics, then asked to teach the future. Peace did not tame him. He built an airline with a backbone of wartime know-how, flying where roads failed and politics tangled. Civil air transport stitched remote places together, carried hope and supplies into tight corners of Asia, and, like every instrument sharpened by conflict, cast a long, complicated shadow in the years that followed. You can praise or question the missions. You can't miss the through line. Air used with precision changes what is possible on the ground. Recognition came late, as it often does for the stubborn. An honorary third star just days before cancer. Closed the book. Burial with honors among the rows of stones that measure the cost of corals and the value of clarity. Critics remained, legends hardened. The record stayed indifferent to both. But the deeper legacy doesn't live in statues or stamps. It lives in habits that outlast the airplanes they were born with. Two-ship and four-ship disciplines so ingrained that a pilot can brief it with the economy of a prayer. Altitude and energy treated like currency, save for the moment when the bill comes due. Debriefs that turn luck into lessons. Early warning evolving from human ears and field telephones to radar nets and command systems, all chasing the same end. Shave seconds off confusion and add them to decision. Open any modern fighter tactics manual, and you can hear the echo. Don't be forced into the enemy's fight. Attack from advantage. Leave on your terms. Return when the geometry is yours again. It's not romance, it's repeatability. And repeatability is how a squadron becomes a force, and a force becomes a fact. There is also a quieter moral that travels well beyond runways and rivets. Institutions love elegant ideas. Reality loves tested ones. The distance between those two loves is where careers break or remake themselves. Chennault didn't win because he shouted louder. He won because the sky kept answering his questions the same way. He refused to mistake staged exercises for truth. He refused to spend courage where discipline would do. He refused to turn weak. Turning made him weak. So ask yourself, before we close, where in your world does "the bomber will always get through" still hide in plain sight as a slogan no one has bothered to test? Which assumptions are coasting on elegance rather than evidence? Drop your answer in the comments. That conversation is why we make films like this. If this story gave you a new lens on WW2 or on how ideas fight their way into the world, help it travel. Like the video so the algorithm doesn't bury it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Ring the bell if you want to be in the first wave when we drop a new episode. And tell me what you want next. The inside anatomy of an AVG intercept, a deep dive on why the P-40 was the wrong airplane, or the escort war over Germany where doctrine finally met its escort and changed. He was fired for obsolete tactics. Then he won the air war. That's not just a headline. It's a blueprint. Let's keep building with it.